Friends, Jordan Montgomery here, and we're glad that you've tuned into another episode of the Growth Over Goals podcast. Before we jump into today's conversation, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Thompson & Co. Salon and Parlor. Thompson & Co. Salon and Parlor is a family-owned, stylist-owned community salon that fits the needs for all types of families. Located in downtown Iowa City and now a second location in Coralville, North Liberty area, TCO specializes in all things hair. In fact, that's where I've been getting my hair done for the last 7 years. TCO specializes in hair cutting, razor cutting, the most modern color techniques, and high-end hair extensions. As one of Iowa's only intercoiffure salons and Salon Today's top 200 salons in the U.S., TCO looks forward to being the salon of choice for you and those you love. Be sure to call or book on their website today at thompsonandcosalon.com. Thank you, TCO, for all you do for us and our community. Welcome back to the Growth Over Goals podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Montgomery, and today I get to hang out with a new friend who I am learning from. We both share the love of speaking and all things communication. We recently got introduced through our mutual friend, Jess Ekstrom. Shout out, Jess. You're awesome. Thanks for putting us together. Woo. And listen, I think today's guest is really relevant to anyone who wants to influence people. We're going to talk about communication and speaking, but I don't care if you're a business owner, a stay-at-home mom or dad, you want to be more impactful in your community, or like Katie and I, you do want to speak or do speak for a living. I think Katie is going to provide immense value over this next 30, 40 minutes, and I'm excited for you to learn from her. I know I'm going to learn from her. Let me introduce you formally to Katie Quesada. Katie and her husband, Danny, have two daughters, Gracie and Lane. They live in Orange County, California. Let's go West Coast, best coast. And Katie is a speaker and storytelling consultant. She has a great brand on social media. There are a lot of ways that you can engage with Katie if you want to take your communication game to the next level. We're going to take our communication game to the next level over the next 30, 40 minutes. Welcome to the show, Katie Quesada. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Jordan, for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, me too. So our audience needs to know this. You have a crazy story in terms of how you got into this work. And I just thought we'd drop right in to that story. Can we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. 5-ish years ago now, my husband and I were living in Los Angeles and had one daughter, and it had been like a really hard season for us. I mean, we were having a hard time in our marriage. My work, I didn't like it anymore. We were having a hard time getting pregnant again. It was one of those seasons where you're like, oh, can nothing go right? You know, over and over and over again. And in the middle of it, we bought a junky 1990s RV with a group of friends. Like the kind with carpet in it. Like, this is what we're talking about here, right? Like, I mean, 90s RV. Whatever you're picturing in your head, it was just like that. We bought that RV and we renovated it and took it on some trips. And it was like this point of joy in our lives when things were hard. And we got back from one of those trips and my husband said, hey, do you think we could live in an RV? I was like, I don't know. And that was kind of like, that was our very initial conversation. And then things at work for me got harder and harder. And in the meantime, at this job, I was speaking regularly. I was bringing in speakers. We were putting on a huge events for people. And a couple months before this, we had brought in a woman named Dr. Tama Bryant Davis. She's amazing. You guys can follow her on everything. She's wonderful. She's written lots of books. But one Friday night, I was sitting behind the little curtain and she said from the stage, did you know that there is a Barnes and Noble of untold stories here in this room? And I felt this like very significant conviction that I was never supposed to speak on that stage again. And I was never supposed to bring in a speaker again. I was supposed to teach everyday people how to tell their stories. So I flipped the script at this job that I was kind of trying to quit. And I started to, behind the scenes, sit across from 4 people, a very diverse panel every time. And they would tell me their life story. And I would help them say it in 6 minutes. So I did this over and over and over again, and I gave them the platform to speak from the stage in 6 minutes, and I loved it. It was like a part of the joy in my life too. So all of this was happening. I was like, I know I have to quit this job, but I'm kind of secretly story coaching people, this weird thing that I made up. But the audience is loving hearing from everyday people, loving it. You know, I mean, they're like, this is incredible. Their stories are incredible. It was such a sweet season. for that role and what that was. And then as kind of life was falling apart, my husband and I were like, okay, I think you need to quit your job. I was like, yes, it's too stressful. But we were living in Los Angeles, California, which is not a good place to have one income, just generally. And so we were like, how do we do this? What do we do? And I started to follow a bunch of people on Instagram who live in tiny houses. And the day I went to quit my job and announced to my team that I oversaw that I was quitting, I was standing outside the door and I opened my phone. And the woman that I follow went live and said, our RV's for sale. And I was like, what? And so she had a huge following. So I DM'd her and said, we want it. And I hadn't even talked to my husband. And I walked inside and I quit my job and I left and I called my husband and I said, you're never going to believe this, but that RV that we both love, the lady said it's for sale. And I DM'd her and I said, maybe we want it. But she has so many followers, we won't get it. You know, it's kind of what I was saying. And he got home that night and we got an email and the email said, you have 30 minutes to decide tonight if you want it. It's a cash deposit required tonight and you need to pick it up in 2 weeks. And so my husband and I had 30 minutes to decide if we were going to sell everything we own and go tiny. And I love, I loved it for a lot of people in their stories, especially about their marriage. Their stories always sound like this, like for 10 years, we've been praying about this, for like 5 years, we sought counsel, we were in therapy over this. Like we brought in mentors, we wrote books about it. But in real time for a lot of our lives, like you have 30 minutes to decide to change your story. And you have to make a different decision. And so in those 30 minutes, my husband and I were like kind of arguing, talking at the same time, like, should we? I don't know. Should we? Back and forth. And it was just we looked at each other finally at the end of the 30 minutes and said, well, okay, let's do it. And then we sold everything we owned and moved into a 180 square foot tiny house, a beautiful renovated travel trailer. And we lived there for 2 years while I launched a storytelling consulting business. And then after we moved in there, 3 weeks later, we got pregnant with my second daughter. And we were like, oh, wow, there's the baby and there's the job and all the things that we kind of had needed and wanted along the way. And I started this kind of core foundation that stories are better than stuff, that we have to start collecting stories more often instead of collecting things. And then I launched this business. And now 5 years later, I get to work with brands like American Eagle and Zillow and United Healthcare to lead workshops and keynotes and help teams tell more concise and compelling narratives. So I just help people take big ideas and make them a little bit shorter and more compelling.
So we're going to get to stories in just a second. After all, that's why we're here. We want to learn from Katie and how to tell a concise, impactful story. Before we do that, what were some of the things that you learned? I mean, there's at least one person thinking like I'm thinking, like, what was that like? This like tiny house experience RV.
Yes,
what did you learn through that experience?
Oh, so many things, a million things. I mean, one of the things I like to joke with people about now all the time is you will never know how many cups you have. Like the amount of cups in your house right now, probably 100, Jordan. And I've never been to your house, you know, maybe even 200. Like the amount of things that we have all accumulated over time, there's so many revelations, but I think for my husband and I, it was about like curating and caring for the things that we did have. Especially with little kids, I think you know this too, like your kids come home with stuff every day. Like, where did that toy come from? We don't even know, what is that gift bag, And when we were living in the RV, we used to say nothing comes through the doors, leave it on the front porch. If you want it, we can decide tomorrow. And like, just leave it all out there. We don't have room. It was definitely a season of kind of realizing that less is more. And our family was so close. Is still really close, but in that season made our family so close. My husband and I had to really work on communication because you can never hide. So if one person is mad, you can like feel it from across the house. You're like, I can see your body language from all the way back here, which is only 12 feet away. So, all of that, we like had to kind of bond in it. But people still ask us this day, would you ever do it again? And we both are like, yeah, absolutely. We could do it again. Now we live in a house that's 4 times as big. So a mansion, it's 850 square feet. So now we live in a large, lovely home in Orange County. And we get to really enjoy all of that space too. So yeah, it was such a great season. I think everyone has such an interesting relationship with stuff, but you never really have to be faced with it until you have to give it away or you experiencing something tragic or, there's all those different seasons. But I think for a lot of us, our relationship with stuff is just like, bigger, more.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes. So true. Well, it's interesting because I think so many entrepreneurs have this story of like humble beginnings.
Yeah.
But you have the story of like humble and profoundly simple beginnings, So I'm sure you'll always look back at that on that season as just a sweet season of growing and stewarding, this thing that today is fairly big and complex and has a lot of parts to it. And you're doing some really significant work. And so I just want to dive right in. Let's get practical. And I want to let you riff a little bit because you've got so much gold to share. I've been learning from you already on, as a speaker who does tell stories, I'm like, oh, wow, I messed that up and I get this wrong. And I make that mistake. And so could we actually start with maybe some of the misnomers? Like, what are some of the things that you see communicators or just people do in telling stories that maybe either gets in their way or minimizes their ability to be impactful?
Yeah, so I kind of break down storytelling in general into 3 C's, which are context, conflict, and conclusion. There's a million different ways to look at storytelling, but that's the simplest way I have learned to explain it. That all of us need to figure out the balance between context, conflict, and conclusion. And when we can figure out how to balance those 3 things really well in a way that's concise, we will nail it. So some of us give way too much context. We tell stories like, oh, the year was 1994 and it was May and I was wearing a green sweater and I was a little bit cold and I think my mom was in Spain. And, and you're like, what is happening? Like where are we going in this story? And some people give way too little context and they say things like, oh yeah, there was a horse. And you're like, where? And they're like, outside. And you're like, when? And they're like, yesterday, and you're like, where were you? And they're like, I was in the car. And you're like, okay, I had to ask so many questions to be able to visualize the story. So there's definitely a spectrum of context that's really valuable. You basically just want to give enough context to where someone could close their eyes and picture it quickly. So it doesn't need to be full detail. We're not writing a book here, but just a quick, like, when I was 27, I was outside in the spring, okay, there we go. Let's at least get some things going there. And then conflict is huge in storytelling and in speaking. And I have found, I think especially for female speakers, but I think in general, just people who maybe identify as people pleasers, we tend to shy away from conflict in storytelling. We tend to tell stories like, oh yeah, it was like super hard, but you know what? It's fine. And people are like, what? What happened? What should I learn from that? Like, tell me the whole truth is the heartbeat of that conflict, that middle C. Tell me how you felt. Tell me what you were worried about. Tell me what you were scared was going to happen. Tell me what someone told you that hurt your feelings. Like, tell me that conflict in that season. What was that season like for you for real? If you were like talking to just your best friend, now that you're out of it, let's tell the whole truth in conflict. Because some of us really do skip over the hardest, heaviest parts. Like, and that's where this story gold is found, when people are really like, oh yeah, and I was struggling with addiction, or yeah, and I didn't know if my spouse was going to make it. And I, started to send emails to figure out how to talk to my mortgage company, like those like things that these really nitty gritty details and conflict really make stories come to life. And then conclusion, I think, is just something that as leaders, if you lead in any capacity, you need to learn how to conclude your stories. So you need to learn how to say, and now we know, and then I learned, and now we can see. So now we get to, because of this, we often as leaders, especially people who are managing teams, they tell a long story and then people are like, I wonder what he meant by that.
Yes.
Like, I wonder where we're going now, like learn how to conclude in any storytelling, but even in your own personal storytelling. And then I got to, and now I feel, and now we are, to kind of wrap. So those are the 3 C's of storytelling. That's kind of a super hyper fast version of it, but those are helpful pieces to put a good story together.
It's so good. So here's a question that I get often, or that I even ponder myself, and I'd love for you to speak into this, but people will often ask about the use of story. So let's zoom out a little bit. I was on a call yesterday with an executive leader. He's giving a big presentation, and he's like, hey, would you just listen to this? He's a coaching client of ours. And so jumped on a Zoom call. He gave his 30-minute presentation. I listened. And part of my feedback was, I think you need to elaborate on your stories. And I think you need to use more stories. But why, from your lens, Katie, and with all of your experience, why does stories resonate with people? Like, what is it about a story that reaches people and impacts people in a deeper and greater way?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, most importantly, outside of all fluff, storytelling scientifically works. Like, that person's pitch will be more memorable, will create emotion and action, will release dopamine in the listener's brain, will create the feeling of desiring cooperation. Like, so even outside of reason that story is entertaining or fun, right? You can put all that aside. Storytelling scientifically works. Like, there's such awesome research. I go through a lot of this in my workshops, especially with teams that tend, what I call, to drown people in data. They're like, here's the numbers and here's the numbers and here's more numbers and whoa, surprise number and then big number and then small number, And I'm like, okay, this is great, but I'm drowning in data. I need you to tell me a story because guess what? I could have read that graph. Could have read it. But I want to hear from you on why this matters.
Yes.
And so kind of walking through those pieces a little bit so important. So storytelling works. I mean, have you heard of the Huberman Lab podcast? He's like a science guy.
Okay.
And he is like,
Talk to me.
He's got a wild, long science podcast. He's good for like health. But one of the things he said, which I loved in one of his podcasts, is that there's only two things in the world that have been proven to physiologically align people, meaning our breathing patterns and our heart rates. And those two things are music and storytelling. When you're like, I mean, as you are, Jordan, like you're an engaging keynote speaker. So when you're on a stage, people in the room breathe slower and together. There's like such cool, like physical responses to that you as a keynote speaker might not realize like, oh, that's what I'm doing because I'm making everyone's brain waves align. Like how helpful to get to a better idea. So there's just I could talk for 5 hours about the research and science of storytelling. There's a book called The Science of Storytelling. There's like some great research on that. But the most important fact, I think, when you're giving that feedback to your client is just to ask the question, do you want them to remember this or not?
It's good.
And if they say, yes, I do want them to remember this, then you say, okay, well, factually, what we know is people do not remember numbers. They do remember stories. So we know that. So that's a helpful piece in the puzzle as well.
So good. I love that. Do you want people to remember this or not? I love what you said about context, conflict, conclusion. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and we'll go behind the scenes. There's a lot of ways to work with you. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But so whether, I'm a keynote speaker, I'm not a keynote speaker, I just want to get better at storytelling. I sit down with you, Katie, and I say, okay, how do I get started? Like, what are the foundational pieces of creating a great story? Talk to me. Yeah.
So in the work that I do in workshops or coaching, we start with your story map. So a story map is something that I actually created when I was a junior high youth leader 20 years ago or something, maybe 15 years ago. But I was leading a team of junior high boys and I could not get them to talk to me. I was like, so how was your day? And they were like, no. And I was like, but how's your relationship with your parents? And they were like, nah. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out a way to get these people to talk to me and tell me about their life. And so I built this map, and basically it's like a series of squares that I do with my clients all the time. But what we do together is we identify 7 key moments from your life that changed you. And we do it in 7 minutes. It's very, very quick. And then from each of those moments, we identify one word of something you learned from that thing. And then we turn it from a micro story to a macro story. So a micro story is an event. A macro story is value. So you want to take everything you've been through and attach meaning to it, because that is where the story doors open wide. If we just do events, then we don't let people into our story doors. So if I was to say, that my example is perfect of, you'll only agree with me if you've also lived in 180 square feet, right? Everyone's like, no, not me and never. But I can say things like, if you really value relationships and storytelling and simplicity, maybe we have something in common, and then it's like, oh, wait, that's what I took from that season. And now we have shared values. So the first steps definitely are find some good stories and find one word of a thing you learned from that thing, then build out that story. And then I do all short form storytelling. So I know people who write books and have written lots of books, but what I do is like, now let's write that story in 5 sentences. I don't know if you've heard the great Mark Twain quote, but he says, I'm so sorry I didn't have time. I'm so sorry I wrote a novel. I didn't have time to write a paragraph.
Yes.
That's actually hard to make things shorter.
Yes.
So that's where then I go, okay, what was the context? What was the conflict? What was the conclusion? Make sure your value word is in there. We're done. So I kind of start with that process to help people condense it and make it shorter and shorter. And we go from there. So that's kind of my usual flow with clients on how to kind of create those stories.
I love the Mark Twain quote. And in our work, we're constantly telling people to go shorter and speak slower. Hardly ever is it like you need to speak faster and go longer. And also, isn't it interesting when you listen to somebody speak? How often are you like, man, I wish they would go longer? Like just hardly ever, right. Even if they're good, like even somebody who delivers a really powerful presentation that's engaging and impactful. It's like, even then, like most humans are like, okay, that was really good. And I'm kind of ready for it to be done, you know?
Yes.
So I think I love your work on going shorter. Anything do you want to add to that about how you help people like extract or subtract, like any tips there that you would be willing to offer?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just so you know, in my own work, I'm always working on speaking slower. This is my greatest weakness. And I am such an auctioneer speed talker that people are like, oh my gosh, Katie, what's happening? And I do get to tell clients, okay, this is hard for me too, but let's take a breath. Have we thought about breathing? You know, just like some general ideas there, because there's so much more weight when you can create tonality. I totally agree that condensing of information is so huge. I think we always want more time when it's us, and then we want less time when it's someone else. And so I think when we can kind of own that, like, wow, I've been given the stage, you know, I should take up an hour because they gave me an hour and I have an hour. You know, and my push would be, can you do it in 30? And then can you have 30 minutes where someone gets to actually think about themselves? So the greatest storytellers actually don't make people think about the storyteller. They make people think about themselves.
Yes.
So that's when a really good speaker or storyteller, you know, exactly as you do, Jordan. Like when you're talking, people aren't like, Jordan. They're like, oh, wait, my thing. Wait, my dad. Wait, leadership. So you want to make people self-reflect. So I think the use of time is a really interesting thing. I really do think it's so valuable to think, oh, wow, does this meeting need to be an hour? Update? No, it can be 12 minutes or it can be a video. So those kinds of things are just important pieces to the puzzle. Because people are thinking about themselves. They're busy and they got things to do. But we do need to figure out how to capture their attention and create emotion in the meantime.
That is so true and so profound that you said, when it's us, we want more. When it's somebody else, we want less. You know, and I had a mentor, he would always say, and I don't know if this is the number one rule in speaking, but it's certainly one of the top rules in speaking. It's just don't go long. His thing was always just don't go long. Don't violate the expectation of time, because it's true that somebody can enjoy the time that they spend with you and then resent you for it later. You know, like we've all been in those situations where I was like, I actually loved the hour I spent with you, but because you went an hour and 15 minutes and now I'm late to my next thing, I'm actually like resenting you, even though I enjoyed it. Like it's this interesting dichotomy. I want to ask you about two topics that we get asked about often, or that comes up often when we're working with speakers. What are your thoughts on how we use humor? And then also on vulnerability. When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? How much of that do I do? Do I consider? Like, some people say, gosh, you need to be funny. Other people say, don't be funny. Some people say you need to be more vulnerable. Other people say, don't be so vulnerable. Like what are your thoughts on how we use humor and vulnerability in storytelling, Katie?
Yeah, that's great. Those are great questions. I think, first of all, I like to use the word levity instead of humor. Because when I'm coaching with clients and working with people, because I do think some people are not funny. And I mean that lovingly. Like, don't try to be funny if you're not funny, because that's worse, because you're brilliant. Yes. So be brilliant. Or you're deep. So be deep. But I think in keynotes, or if someone's going to listen to you for more than 10 minutes, levity is important. And levity is just giving someone the ability to come up for air. And that might be something like, I'm talking about a really deep, hard thing, but then I mention, in a season of my life, I was addicted to Pizza Hut. You know, like that's like whatever levity, like just to, I think of it as coming up for air.
Good.
So I think that those two things are different. I have had people who have worked with me who are like, Katie, I want you to teach me how to be funny. That's what I need. And I'm like, I don't know if we're going to do that. Because humor is like, the complexity of humor is shocking. You know, it's timing, it's tone, it's confidence, it's reading the room, it's understanding what they think is funny. I mean, there's so many pieces there, but I think levity is something that you can always add in just for a break in people's brains and hearts, because that's what humor is doing. Humor is breaking down walls so that someone can enter. Humor is giving me a breath in the midst of your intensity. Yes. So I think kind of sitting with those things is helpful. So that might be controversial, but
this is a masterclass. I just cut you off. I'm sorry. This is I had to say this. This is a masterclass in communication. So if you're listening and you're a communicator, you want to be a better communicator, I would encourage you to go back and listen to this again. I hope you're taking notes. This is so rich. I love the distinction between levity and humor. What about vulnerability? Any thoughts there on just when, how, go for it.
Yeah. So one of the ground rules that I do, all of my workshops and keynotes start with storytelling ground rules. And we go through 8 things that we all have to begin on the same page about before I can go anywhere. And one of those is that we speak from scars, not from wounds. And that's a Nadia Bolz-Weber quote. And she says, like, learn how to speak from a place of any healing. So I get to tell clients all the time, people come to me and they're like, Katie, I'm in the middle of the craziest thing and I'm ready to tell the story. And I'm like, and I can see so much emotion on them and they clearly haven't processed any of it and it's happening in real time. And so I started to have to say things like, if there's lawyers involved, it's not time, or if you are instantly crying the second you talk about it, it's time for therapy, not storytelling. Because the first story has to be told to yourself. You need a rough draft first.
Yeah.
And so you have to wait till it ends, close the chapter, read it yourself before it can go anywhere else. So yes, vulnerability I think is insanely valuable and important. It is at the core of what I teach on, because I get to tell teams all the time, don't bother leading a team unless you're willing to share some of your story. We're out. We are far past leaders who are, distant, cold, and lead without you knowing anything about their personal life. Just generationally, we are so far past that. One of the quotes that I do too is, if you want someone to do something, you now have to make them feel something. Ooh. And that's a different type of leadership that we're in now.
Say it again.
If you want someone to do something, you have to make them feel something. So what the world we used to live in is, if you want someone to do something, you tell them, do it, and then you go home and you have a nice meal at 5 p.m.
Yes.
But now we're in a world where leaders need to make people feel things in order to make them do things. And that happens through human connected storytelling. So vulnerability is key to leadership, but only as much as you have emotional health. So those things cannot be unbroken. So I do have leaders who work with me and they're like, oh, I just told my whole team about my messy divorce and I'm crying hysterically. And, and I'm like, let's process through professional excellence, vulnerability, healing, space, time, boundaries. All of those factors have to go into play for something else. So I say, maybe wait until that was a little bit healed over before that's the space for sharing it. But your close friends, be a mess with. That's their job.
Yeah. I'm not going to do this quote justice. I might butcher it slightly, but I think it was Brene Brown that said, it's time for you to tell the story, or you can tell the story when it no longer impacts your current identity, right? If you're able to tell it in a way that's not making you feel super insecure or questioning some part of who you are, then you might be ready. But I think you're right. I think so many of us are premature. We're speaking from a place of a wound instead of a scar. Love what you said about that. And then John Maxwell told me this one time about the humor. You call it levity. I love that. He said so many people are taught to be funny, but if you're not funny, it's a major mistake. Because I think in the speaking world,
Absolutely.
You hear that, right? Somebody will say, hey, you know what? Start with a joke, which is a major mistake if you're not funny,
Such bad advice.
It's the worst advice. Yes. It's just terrible. Yes. And then if it doesn't land, it's you're just kind of screwed for the rest of the, but it goes back to you're most effective when you're most authentic. And so, the best person you could be is yourself and just be authentic. And I want to point this out. I think that's worked really well for you and how you show up. I think you've learned to be comfortable, in your own skin. And you show up as this secure, confident communicator. To that end, anything that you would give to the person who's working on just confidence, be more bold, more courageous in their storytelling, what would you offer to that person?
One of the storytelling ground rules is that storytelling cannot be comparative. It cannot. So if you are wondering if you should tell your story or not, and then the first question you ask is her story better than mine? Then you will literally never tell a story, because you're right. It is. There are crazier stories than your life. Fact, right? I have sat across from people that I'm like, this is literally the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. But storytelling, the only weird analogy that I've come up with is Amazon reviews. Do you really just want one good review on a product, or do you want 10,000 reviews? We want 10,000. We need the more stories we have, the better we all are collectively. Yes. In our inclusivity, in our empathy, in our dialogue. We actually need you, whoever's listening to this, we need your unique life story, because you have been through things that can help someone that I cannot, that Jordan cannot. Fact. We have not collectively experienced everything. Like any leader hasn't. So I have just, that was kind of where the business was born, was we don't need 3 really good storytellers. We need 3,000 people to be a little braver. And when we can kind of like do that over and over and over and over again, we get like diverse storytelling, and we get to hear things that we're like, oh my gosh, I never, ever would have thought of that ever. That's crazy. You know, we need to like sit with our grandma and say, hey, what was that like for you? And, you know, kind of start to collect those stories so that we can become more intentional. So yeah, I think I would probably tell someone your story is really valuable and what you've been through can really help someone.
It's good.
And when you start with that core belief, that deep inner knowing, when you know that, it will really unlock that feeling for you, because you won't be as worried as like, do I have the right words? Will someone like it? Those actually aren't the questions we're asking. The only question we're asking is, does your story serve someone? And if the answer to that is yes, we can start. We have somewhere to begin.
So good. Craig Rochelle said on this podcast recently that the quickest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else. You know, and
that's
it's like,
good.
man, that's true.
Yes.
Like you have something special, but you crush it when you start to compare it to what somebody else has, a story that they have or a thing that they have. So, Katie, you are full of wisdom and knowledge. This is so good. Again, masterclass on communication. I want to challenge you a little bit, because I think this goes way beyond storytelling. And I love that you've picked like your specific niche lane like that. There's wisdom in that, right? And you're crushing that lane. But you're like a communication expert. You're not a storytelling expert. This is like, so much of this is transferable to all of, you know, communication and connection. Before we sign off, I want to know where to go to find you. So I know, but people need to know. And then also, people are wondering, well, I want to work with Katie. How do I do that? Like, how do I start in working with Katie and your team? Like, so could you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So my name is Katie Quesada. You can see it on the show notes. And that is my clean handle everywhere. My website is katiequesada.com. My Instagram is Katie Quesada. It's all across the board, just Katie Quesada. I have a course called Story School, and that is a 15 module immersive. It is the masterclass that I've written on storytelling, communication, connection. And that is an amazing place to start for anyone. That is a deep dive that goes into so many more topics and ideas on speaking, storytelling, connecting, talking about yourself, talking about your brand, your business. All of those pieces are in Story School. So that would be a great first place for someone to start. And then I do high level one-on-one keynote coaching. And then the vast majority of the work I do is with teams. So I get to fly all over the country and lead storytelling 101, 201, and 301 for teams that are looking to communicate more effectively together. So if you oversee a team or you work at a company and you're like, you know what, we got to learn how to talk to each other, and especially our clients, then that's a great way to start.
All right, Katie. So this is one of my final questions. Might be my final question. There's a person right now who's listening to this, and they're driving down the road, or I don't know what they're doing. It's Saturday morning. They're having their cup of coffee or tea or whatever. And they're like, I think I have a story and I think I want to tell it, but I'm not sure. What would you say to that person who's got a story inside them, but they're kind of going back and forth on, is it really worth it? And should I tell it? And, but if you're going to encourage somebody to step out, share their story, what words of encouragement would you offer to that person about the story that lives inside of them?
Yeah, I think some of us, especially if we've lived through significant experiences, our brain immediately goes to, okay, what stages or spaces can I tell my story at? Like, what would that look like one day? But I like to tell people all the time that the greatest stories are told at dinner tables. That is where storytelling always begins. Because to be totally honest, I mean, we know from the research that the highest level of influence happens at dinner tables. It does not happen when you're listening to someone on a stage or to someone on a podcast, although I love these podcasts. But the truth is, if you want to make true influence in your storytelling, then you start to tell those stories around dinner tables. So I tell people, okay, step one, find someone you love and say, I want to go to coffee and tell you all about this thing I've never told you about. And then you can say, hey, to the next person, hey, I would love to talk to you about my story and maybe see if we can brainstorm where that story might serve people best. And then sit with a friend and kind of start to work through those things. And then maybe write out a rough draft and say, okay, who does this help and how? and then figure out, how do I want to influence those people and where? And that might be an Instagram story. It might be a podcast yourself. It might be that you're a keynote speaker. It might be that you're ready to write that book finally. It might just be that you're ready to tell the people you love what happened. And those are, all of those different stories are there. And then on the flip side of that, Jordan, I think one of the really unique things that I've gotten to sit with people in is that some of the most powerful things that we get to tell people is, oh, you don't have to tell that story anymore. That a lot of people have really been defined by a life event, and they think that that's who they are. They're like, this is it. I am this. I am divorced. I am the car crash. I am the diagnosis. I am the firing. I am the unemployment. And that's the story I have to tell because I've been telling it for so long, and people are really engaged with that story and they feel connected to me maybe in that story. But the truth is, if you don't want to tell that story anymore, you don't have to. You get to decide today that oh, wow, I want to live a totally different story than that one. I don't have to tell it anymore.
Yes.
And that's okay because you get to write a new one and live in a new one. And so I think that that's two sides of the same coin. It start to tell that story, but also you don't have to tell the other ones if you don't want to.
That is so good. Wise words, my friend. And I was going to tell you this when we wrapped up the conversation, offline. But,
yeah.
I've been speaking for years, and we're so fortunate that we get to do this work. It's always an honor when you get to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need to work with Katie Quesada on keynote coaching. I'm serious. There's just so much wisdom in how you're unpacking this today is just, it's speaking to me. I'm like, man, there's just gold here. So thank you. Because it's always fun to podcast. One of my favorite things about podcasting is you get to learn. But this is such an important part of what we do. And I'm like, man, I think you got a new client. I need to hire you and work with you. So,
I so appreciate that, Jordan. No, I really do. And I think that core feeling, which is so interesting, is Adam Grant says it best, which I love. He says, especially in the world of speaking, we expect to either have a critic or a cheerleader. But what we need in the middle is a coach. And I think that's what you do. This is your whole world, you're in this exact zone. But I think feedback in communication is highly tricky because I love you even saying that, I want to get coached because any good coach is hey, any feedback? Anyone have any feedback? But for a lot of us, especially a lot of clients I'm sure we both work with, they're like, oh my gosh, be careful what you tell me because my whole identity is wrapped in whether or not I did a good job on this thing. And we get to come in and say, I'm not going to be a critic and I'm not going to be a cheerleader. I just get to be a coach and help you perform better. And that awesome. Middle space is so special. And that seeking of feedback, I think is, no matter who you are, I absolutely still desire feedback every time I speak and ask for it. I'm I can slow down. I got to take more breaths. I got way too excited. All of those things, that I still am working through constantly. So I love that you say that because I think that is such a core reality for any good communicator is actually wanting feedback.
Yes.
And some people don't. They don't want feedback. They want a thumbs up and they want a cheerleader. But feedback is so valuable in communication and storytelling.
And don't you think too, people struggle, they struggle to ask for it. I also think people struggle to give feedback because unless there's a really close relationship or that person has subject matter expertise, we've all done this. Okay. So I'm guilty.
Yeah.
You heard somebody give a very average or maybe below average presentation. And then they come up to you afterwards. Maybe you're different, Katie. Maybe you've never done this. I've done this. Okay, I just confess.
Yes.
But they kind of catch you off guard, and they haven't really created any kind of space for feedback. They weren't specific in how they asked, and maybe they even asked with a level of enthusiasm. They're what'd you think? And so you don't mean to be dishonest, but you say something yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah. But what you're thinking is actually wasn't very good. But it's so awkward to say, hey, here's the 4 things that I would fix. So, we always say specific questions leads to specific feedback. And I think so much of the issue is the lack of specificity, lack of relationship, lack of space to be able to have that conversation. And so what you said about the middle space, the coaching space, I think it is valuable because it allows for specificity, clarity, space, time. It's awesome. Not a critic, not a cheerleader, just a coach.
It's so good.
Anything else that you want to leave our audience with, Katie, before we sign off today?
Yeah, I hope they just know that they have a story worth telling. And that is 100% true of every single person listening to this podcast. You have, and not just a story, you have many, many stories.
Yeah.
You are not one thing. You are an evolving collection of narratives. And the story of what happened 2 days ago matters. All of those micro moments can build into really powerful storytelling. So I think just seeing that own intrinsic value in their stories will always create more engagement and human connection. And there's someone at a dinner party waiting to hear it from you. And that is a really key part of what we get to do as humans, is connect.
Well said, Katie. And, we would say to the person considering, either a career in speaking, or you're just like, hey, I'd like to speak a few times, next year, whatever. Mm-hmm. If you want to speak more, speak more. So yes. I love what you said about we tend to envision the big stage or the big audience. But also, what about the group of 5 and the group of 3?
Absolutely.
Or the one person, it's like, have a willingness to share and speak and tell and work on your craft, because repetition is the mother of learning. And I think so many people just want to jump right into that, like being on stage. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of work that gets done prior to that. I just listened to Louis Giglio and Craig Rochelle had this awesome conversation on Craig's podcast. And Craig said, okay, Louis, you're one of the best communicators of all time. He gives him this big, huge compliment, and he's like, what is the secret to your communication?
Yeah.
And Louis, is kind of slow to respond. And he's like, I'm not trying to be humble. I'm not aw shucks in it. God's given me a gift. I'm not trying to be humble, but I mean it when I say it. I think my gift is that I've just worked at it really, really hard. And for a lot of years, and I've put more time into it than probably anybody understands or realizes. And so the beautiful part about this craft is you can never fully arrive, right? You're always working at it. And I love that you've devoted your energy and your time to helping people with the craft that ultimately is about continuous improvement. You can never arrive. You never, are the final version. You're always a work in progress. And I think I think the work that you do, especially in the leadership space, in the space of influencing and impacting and serving people, is so important. So keep it up, my friend. Thank you so much. It's awesome to watch you do your thing. And I look forward to becoming your client. I don't even know where we start or what you charge or anything. I'm just like, I'm going to work with you and I'm excited and it's going to be a great journey. So
we'll do a fair trade. I'm ready to have it back, Jordan. We'll do some mutual coaching. I'd love to hear more from you.
Let's go. Well, I for sure know that we have some good conversations in our future. Hey, you're a blessing. I've enjoyed, just getting to know you, spending time with you. I think your future is off the charts bright. So glad that Jess connected us, and just look forward to watching you shine from far and from near for many years to come. So thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jordan. It's been great.
This has been another episode of the Growth Over Goals podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Montgomery. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. If you found any value in this episode, I would love it if you would rate, review, subscribe to this podcast in an effort that we might move our mission of impact forward. I also want to say thank you to our producers, John Choate and James Roth of Storyline Multimedia, for all of the work that they do behind the scenes to make this podcast go. Be well, be great. Have a wonderful day.